Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel. How are you this evening? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing fabulous, thank you very much. And lots of love to you wherever you are around the world. And don't forget to go and get that quintessential glass of your favourite drink, because I've got a fabulous story for you tonight. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners. Tessa, called my mother, there's someone on the telephone for you. It was in the 1980s, and I was 20 years old at the time. Hello, I said, picking up the phone. Who is this? It's me, Sue, silly. How do you fancy going out on a double date on Friday night? Go on, please say yes. It'll be heaps of fun. With who? I said. Well, my boyfriend Joss has a friend called Hugo who's looking for a date. He's very handsome. You'll really like him. Why me? I asked. Isn't there someone else you could take? You know how uncomfortable and awkward I am with strange people. Oh, come on. Don't be such a spoilsport. I think the two of you would get on like a house on fire. Come on, it'll be fun. Please say yes. It'll be heaps of fun. With who? I said. Well, my boyfriend Joss has a friend called Hugo who's looking for a date. He's very handsome. You'll really like him. Why me? I asked. Isn't there someone else you could take? You know how uncomfortable and awkward I am with strange people. Oh, come on. Don't be such a spoilsport. I think the two of you would get on like a house on fire. Come on, it'll be fun. And so it was, with a large degree of reluctance, coupled with great trepidation, I decided to go on this blind date. But I was secretly comforted by the knowledge that Sue and Josh would clearly have my back. I was naturally very shy and self-effacing by nature, but I knew I could rely on my friends to paddle the conversation along if things should become awkward. Hugo was a good-looking man, and I did find him attractive in a way, I suppose, but I did not like the way he was eyeing me with those hawk-like eyes. Even when I was tucking into my pizza, the young man continued to stare at me, and he was making no secret of it either. I could see that even Josh and Sue were becoming increasingly uncomfortable, and Sue was rolling her eyes at the back of her head, trying to encourage Josh to actually say something, because things were becoming pretty intense, and the ambience around the table increasingly strained. Hugo, stop staring at the poor girl. You're making us all feel very uncomfortable. I know she's very pretty, but go on, eat your food. All of a sudden, Hugo suddenly snapped out of his trance-like state and actually apologised. Oh, I'm very sorry. I didn't mean to stare. So things around the table became more relaxed and convivial, but I can't say that I really said much over dinner, and frankly I couldn't wait to get back home. I hated dinner parties like that. As far as I was concerned, the date had been catastrophic, and I hoped I'd never bump into that loser again, as he almost certainly gave me the creeps. I worked in a small town in rural Montana as a shop assistant in a clothing boutique, while I still lived at home with both of my parents, in their exquisitely beautiful country farmhouse, where I'd grown up as a girl, surrounded by verdant rolling countryside, mountainous valleys, and vast areas of extensive wood green. We had 2 barns on our property, a delightful silvery pond, a stable block, and 4 horses, 4 cows, and 3 rambunctious Labradors. We lived in quite a remote area, tucked away in the middle of nowhere. You could literally drive down some of those country roads, surrounded by high embankments and lined with trees, and not see a single car for many miles. I had 3 sisters, all whom were much younger than me, and I was the eldest. My father worked as a manager on a large dairy farm, whilst my mother stayed at home making jams, chutneys and fudge, and all that kind of stuff that she sold to a local delicatessens, and there was a high demand for her products. I'd been working at the boutique for about 8 months, and the owner Janice and I had become as thick as thieves. One morning Janice handed me a large box addressed to me, delivered from the florist. The box looked magnificent and was covered with a ribbon, and a single red rose was wrapped inside some tissue paper, along with a card attached saying, "So enjoyed dinner the other night. Hope to see you very soon. All my love, Hugo." I cast the box to one side with a look of disgust on my face. "Oh no," I said, putting my hands on my head in a gesture of despair. "It's from the chap who stared at me like a goldfish all evening. You know the date I told you about that Sue organised. What was his name? Hugo, I think it was." "Oh, him," said Janice. "Oh dear, methinks you have made an impression on him," she teased. It was a beautiful summer's day, and I was helping an elderly woman who was trying on a turquoise dress for a wedding she was planning to attend, and I was trying to persuade her to buy it because it looked really good on her. "But what about the yellow dress?" she said. "I really like that one." "But I don't like it on you," I told her truthfully. "It really doesn't flatter your figure, and the colour is very draining on you." "Oh dear," said the old lady. "When I was a young girl, I had such a magnificent figure, but I just don't know what happened to it. Now I have to wear clothes to soften all the lumps and bumps, and I loathe it." "Nonsense," I said. "You look great, Miss Green. Don't be so hard on yourself." All of a sudden the bells to the shop jingled, and I looked up hopefully, expecting to see a brand new customer. But it was Hugo carrying a huge bouquet of flowers in his hands, when he'd only just delivered me a rose. I could see that Miss Green was staring at Hugo, with her mouth hanging wide open, as if she'd only just seen a ghost, and the abhorrent expression in her eyes was one of total and utter hatred. I could tell that Miss Green clearly looked on Hugo as an unsavoury, detestable, repugnant character, or should we say a lower form of pond life. "Hello, can I help you?" I said to Hugo, in a very nonchalant way, with an air of indifference, trying my level best to pretend that I didn't recognise him at all. I could see the corners of his lips drop down into a scowl and discern a look of disappointment in his dark brown eyes. "Don't you remember me?" he asked. "We were on a double date together over a week ago with Sue and Josh at that lovely Italian restaurant down the road with the purple awning. You know the one. You had pizza." "Oh, that," I said, sounding dispassionate and really rather offhand and indifferent, as if he was referring to something so dull and tedious that it really wasn't worth mentioning at all. "These are for you," he said proudly, handing me a large bouquet of flowers. "I thought pink and yellow roses would suit you." "Thank you, they're very beautiful," I said. "I was wondering," he stammered, "if you would consider going out for dinner with me tomorrow night. There's a lovely new Italian in town, and the reports are that the food is excellent, and they have particularly good pizza, which I know you like." I promptly thrust the bouquet back at Hugo. "Give those to your mother," I said. "I'm rarely flattered by your generous overtures, but I'm just not interested in you. Don't take it personally. I'm just not looking for a relationship, that's all." "You heard her, Hugo," said Mrs. Green, interceding. "Leave the poor girl alone. She's not interested in you at all." At that, Hugo threw the flowers over the shop, scattering the petals all around the floor, and he stormed out of the boutique with an aggrieved expression on his face. "Believe me, you got off lightly," said Miss Green. "That boy is a nasty piece of work. You want nothing to do with him." "How do you know him, Miss Green?" I asked. "Oh, I wish I didn't. He lives next door to me with his extended family, all whom are very agreeable people. But he turned out to be the rotten egg in the basket. Even his own mother once confided in me that she'd reached the end of her tether with Hugo. She told me she believed her own son was evil. Now for a mother to say that, that's something." "Isn't that a bit dramatic?" said Janice, interceding. "He most certainly did not look evil to me." "Looks can be very deceptive," said Miss Green. "Do you want to know why he's evil? I'll tell you why. One day when I was babysitting Liz's kids, now when I talk about Liz, I'm referring to Hugh's mother, which meant I had to look after Hugh as well, I believe at the time he was only 10 years old. I actually caught him trying to drown my own cat in the bathtub, and I'm not joking either. You what? I said, looking appalled. That is seriously sick. After he failed to succeed in killing my cat, I then discovered he'd placed a plastic bag over my dog's head, and my poor dog was running around frantically, desperately trying to get the bag off, while Hugo just laughed. He found it all terribly amusing and enjoyed seeing my dog's distress. I pulled the bag off my dog and then thrust Hugo into my bathroom. He was kicking, screaming, protesting and biting me, and I just locked him up in there until Liz came back to collect her children. Naturally, I told her I didn't mind babysitting any of her other children, but I never wanted Hugo near my property again. Of course, she understood. Over the years, I've had dog turd posted through my front door, deliveries of dead animals to my home, and even bricks flung into my window from time to time, and I know it's him. Wow, I said. I didn't even know people like that actually existed. Don't be so naive, Tess, said Janice teasingly. Of course there's evil in the world. Everything has its polar opposite. Surely you know that. In the weeks that followed, when I drove home from work late in the afternoon, I always observed this dark Honda travelling closely behind me, and it would pursue me night after night on parts of the road where cars barely ever travelled. Sometimes when I turned down the driveway into my own family farmhouse, this baleful Honda would just park outside the large cattle gate of my family premises and watch me drive down the long drive towards my house. The windows of the Jeep were so dark I couldn't see who the driver was, but I had a nauseating, sick, portentous and inauspicious feeling that the occupant of that Jeep was Hugo himself. In fact, I just knew that I knew it was him. The trouble is, when you're being deliberately shadowed down those long, remote, lonely country roads, it can be very alarming and discomposing. Many of my car journeys home had resulted in me breaking out in a cold sweat and hyperventilating, as that was how my fear just escalated. I had a very clear comprehension and understanding that Hugo was not right in the head, and it was clear to me that he had some kind of weird fixation over me that really needed to be nipped into the bud. I promptly decided to visit the sheriff to tell him what was happening to me, because that was how distressed I had become. I was not surprised to learn that Hugo was well known to the sheriff and had a rap sheet a mile long of assault with a deadly weapon, breaking and entering, and other misdemeanours. Not a nice piece of work, the sheriff informed me. Some people are just born that way. Why don't you come with me, Tess, to the Warwick home? You can tell Hugo once and for all that you want nothing more to do with him, and I'll give him a big telling off on your behalf. Oh, I'm not sure about that, Sheriff. I don't think that's a good idea. Look, said the sheriff, in my experience, when you face your stalker face to face, it's not a bad thing at all. You won't regret it, he assured me, and so I reluctantly agreed. Hugo lived in a large family home with many brothers and sisters, all who came running towards the sheriff's car as we finally parked in the driveway, and they seemed rather excited to see us. Is Hugo in trouble again, Sheriff? Said the little boy, looking earnest. In a manner of speaking, said the sheriff. Is he home? The little boy nodded, eyeing me curiously. What's he done now? Said the mother, rubbing her floury hands on her apron. Hugo, she called. Hugo. Sorry, Sheriff, she explained. I'm in the middle of kneading dough. Then I saw him, and he stopped dead in his tracks on seeing me standing there next to the sheriff. Tess has something she wants to say to you, said the sheriff. I was feeling rather awkward and began to tremble uncomfortably, as the kitchen was now filled with children in varying ages. All eyes were focused on me. I came here today to ask you to leave me alone. Stop following me in my car. Leave me alone. I'm not interested in a relationship with you. Please get the message. You heard her, said Hugo's mother, looking at Hugo with savage, angry eyes. If you lay a hand on this girl, Hugo, you'll have me to deal with. Do you understand? Hugo nodded his head. Hugo, if you've been following Jess around at night in your car,
It has to stop now. This is very serious indeed. And if you carry on in this way, conducting yourself like this inappropriately, you'll be locked up in a shoebox for the rest of your life, and I don't think you want that."
I was beginning to feel as if a weight had been lifted, because I was no longer being stalked by Hugo. The stunt with the sheriff had really paid off. I really believed he'd finally got the message, and it would see my life return to normal. But things began to change when I started to date a new boy in town a couple of months later. I never saw anything physically, nor did I detect anyone following me back home at night in my white Mustang, but I sensed something was seriously off. It was on a Friday morning I woke up with a sickening, nauseating feeling in my gut. It was so overwhelming that I seriously considered just calling in sick. Yet I was by nature a diligent, very hard-working person, and I didn't fancy leaving poor Janice to do all the stock-taking alone in the boutique, as it was a laborious, thankless task that was likely to take most of the night. "What's wrong?" said Janice as we were going through the stock. "You look so subdued and quiet today, if you don't mind me saying so, and you look a little green in the face. You're not getting sick, are you?" "No," I said, "it's not that." As you can imagine, the stocktake was an unforgiving, thankless task, but luckily it was finally finished by about 10 at night. "Take the morning off," said Janice. "You've outdone yourself this evening. Well done." I was exhausted and grabbed a coffee to go, and quickly got back into my car. And as I was driving down some of those precipitous country roads, I noticed that not too far behind me was a bright red Ford Escort, which I did think was strange at this time of the night, as I always found the roads unusually quiet. I did not give the matter any further thought until my car started to stall, and then came to a grinding stop. My petrol tank was empty, but I mean, how was that possible? I'd filled the tank earlier on in the morning. Thankfully, I could see the red Ford Escort stop behind my Mustang in my rear mirror, and I felt heartily relieved that I was likely to get some help from a generous Samaritan. Well, so I thought. "Do you need some help?" came the voice. "Yes, please," I said. "I've run out of petrol." Imagine my horror when I found myself standing face to face with Hugo. I could detect the strong smell of whiskey on his breath, and his brown eyes looked very intense. What are you doing here?" I stuttered. "You need to stop playing games with me," said Hugo. "Stop playing so hard to get. You know you really want me." "I'm not playing any games with you," I said. "Anyway, I have a boyfriend." "And what's he got that I haven't got?" asked Hugo. "Do you think I'm just going to sit back, seeing you with another man, and do nothing about it? Ha! Do you think I'm such a complete idiot?" I could see the anger rising up in Hugo's face, and it alarmed and frightened me. Worse still, he began fiddling at the halter on the side of his jeans, and I suddenly realised the precariousness of my situation, because this unhinged young man would think nothing of putting a bullet through my head. So without hesitation, I began to run over the embankment through the woodland trees, having little clue as to where I was going, but luckily the light of an almost full moon made my escape a little easier. I could hear Hugo's leather boots following me, and they appeared to be moving faster and faster, gaining more traction and speed, and getting way too close for comfort. "Come back, you bitch!" screamed Hugo. "I'll kill you! Do you get that? I'll kill you, girl!" My heart was pounding violently in my chest, and the adrenaline coursing through my veins at a rapid speed, but it did seem to give me an edge. Before long, I found myself in a very beautiful Sylvan, with tall, statuesque trees and open trails. I looked around frantically, as I could hear Hugo coming close behind me, and I had no idea where the heck to hide. I had only seconds to find a place, so I dashed up to a rocky outcrop, surrounded by some high brush, and began to buckle down to the undergrowth, praying to God that he would never see me. I realised to my horror that Hugo had a flashlight with him, and was shining it all over the pine forest. For some reason he knew I was hiding very close by. I held my breath, terrified that even my breathing could alert him to my presence. I could hear my heart vibrating through my chest, and my whole body was quite literally shaking in terror.
"I know you're here," he said. "You think everything is a big game, don't you? Girls like you always do. You think you can get away with teasing a man without any repercussions. It doesn't work that way. You need sorting out, girl. And I think a bullet to your head is what is called for. I'm not going to sit back and watch you date other men. You turned me down, and then you go out with other men. If I can't have you, then no one can."
I lay down in the brush as quietly as I could, and then I suddenly heard these heavy feet walking past me, and I nearly had a heart attack because I thought it was Hugo. He was way too close for comfort. He was bound to see me. I looked up through the grass warily and realised in astonishment that I was staring at something the likes of such that I've never seen before. And whatever it was, this thing was staring back at me with a look of extreme astonishment on his face, as if to say, "What the heck are you doing lying crouched in the shrubbery like that?" The creature was built like a strapping giant, towering at about 8 foot tall and 700 pounds, with a cone-shaped head that folded seamlessly into his shoulders. In my opinion, he looked like a giant wild man. I could sense he had a male energy, but his powerful muscular body was so covered in long flowing hair that I could not discern his sexuality. The creature glanced down at me, and in the moonlight I could see that it had kind eyes, which was very reassuring. In that second our eyes met, and in an unconscious way I truly believe he discerned my trouble and fear, because after I had looked at him, he then glanced towards the woods. He really rather reminded me of the moment when a dog's ears suddenly perk up, when they've heard an intruder or sensed something. I quickly pointed towards the woods and whispered, "He's going to kill me. He's going to kill me. Please help me." I could hear Hugo stamping the ground with a timber stick.
"When I get you, Tess, you're dead, and I'll find you."
I watched as this curious anomalous creature cautiously glided from one pine tree to another with the stealth, grace and fluidness of a cheetah. Finally he peered around the broken trunk of a sizable western cedar tree and peeped at Hugo. The critter then threw a stone at him to attract his attention and to elicit some kind of response, and he wasn't disappointed.
"You think this is funny, Tess?" he shouted. "I told you you're a big tease."
He darted towards the trees to grab what he thought must be me, but instead he found himself holding on to this monstrous-sized beast. I could see Hugo trembling as he let go of the beast with a look of total astonishment on his face, and he lost his balance, falling backwards on the ground, landing on his derriere, and fiddling desperately with his holty to retrieve his revolver. His dismayed eyes were as round as saucers, and the expression on his face was just consumed with terror. And yet, despite his rising level of trepidation, with trembling hands, Hugo still managed to fire several shots at the critter, but all his bullets missed their target. I think Hugo's futile attempts at firing at this strange creature was a monumental mistake on his part, for it grabbed his revolver and flung it on the top of this twisted mountain juniper tree, where it remained on the very top of a gnarled branch, shaped rather like an open shelf, at about 50 feet off the ground, and on his face he wore a look of disgusted revulsion. I watched as the Herculean wild man began to pound his chest, as if to show who was boss, in an act of defiance, and then with a furious growl that was so terrifying that it caused the ground to reverberate, I realised that Hugo was now in the creature's hands. "Please don't hurt me," begged Hugo. But his desperate words were lost on the creature, as he was flung in the air, up and down like a frisbee. Hugo looked so pathetic and tiny in this creature's arms, and I could hear him screaming, "Help! Help! Someone help!" The creature took absolutely no notice,
and to my horror, he simply whacked Hugo's body against the tree trunk, and then I could see his arms go limp. The wild man trotted over to me and pointed towards Hugo's dead body. It was lying there sprawled on the ground, as if to say, "I've sorted out your problem," and then he looked at me with his kind eyes and was gone from my sight. I ran over to Hugo's dead body just to check that he really was gone, and it looked as if his body had been truly whacked, as some of his bones were plunging through the flesh and part of the flesh had burst open. I began to cry. I felt responsible for what had happened and was quick to forget that if it had not been for that mysterious wild man, I would be the one that would be dead. I ran towards the road using Hugo's flashlight to see clearly. I was panting heavily and sweating profusely. I ran over to Hugo's car and opened the door with ease and discovered a petrol decanter full of petrol on the back seat. I grabbed it, filled my car with petrol and got the hell out of there. I did not tell anybody what had transpired, except for Janice, of course, who told me to keep my mouth shut and not to say a word to anyone. "You don't want to be drawn into an investigation," she said. "Just say nothing." Hugo's body was recovered in 12 hours, as the police had found his mother's red Escort empty and had learnt from her that Hugo had not returned home the previous night, and so they searched the area thoroughly and found his body and were completely perturbed as to what on earth had happened to him, as I gather the police had never seen anything like it before, but the death was put down as an attack by a bear. It would seem no one in our town missed Hugo, and the sheriff actually paid me a surprise visit. "Tess, I know you know more about this gruesome business with Hugo," he said. I looked at him in astonishment, my eyes now filling with tears. "How do you know, Sheriff?" I asked. "Call it a hunch," he said, looking at me kindly. "Do you want me to tell you exactly what happened?" I asked. "Not necessary, Tess. The case is now closed. The town is a whole lot safer without Hugo Warwick, and I believe lives have already been saved." "What do you mean, Sheriff?" I asked. "Well, sooner or later a man like that was going to kill someone. Even his mother said so. The trouble is, one killing leads to another. It gets easier every time for the likes of people like Hugo. You don't want someone like that around. But I didn't have good reason to arrest him. All that happened a long time ago, and I believe the wild man I encountered was a Bigfoot. So there you are. That's my story." Wow, what a fabulous story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Until next time, goodbye and good night.